Mary. Chapter 2. A Will, a Way, and a Woman. One day, over 100 years ago, Ursula Townley was waiting for Kenneth MacNair in a great beech wood, where brown nuts were falling and an October wind was making the leaves dance on the ground like pixie people. "What are pixie people?" demanded Peter, forgetting the Story Girl's dislike of interruptions. "Hush!" whispered Cecily. "That is only one of the Awkward Man's poetical touches, I guess." There were cultivated fields between the grove and the dark blue gulf, but far behind, and on each side, were woods. For Prince Edward Island 100 years ago was not what it is today. The settlements were few and scattered, and the population so scanty that old Hugh Townley boasted that he knew every man, woman, and child in it. Old Hugh was quite a noted man in his day. He was noted for several things. He was rich, he was hospitable, he was proud, he was masterful. And he had for daughter the handsomest young woman in Prince Edward Island. Of course, the young men were not blind to her good looks, and she had so many lovers that all the other girls hated her. "You bet," said Dan aside. But the only one who found favor in her eyes was the very last man she should have pitched her fancy on, at least if old Hugh were the judge. Kenneth MacNair was a dark-eyed young sea captain of the next settlement, and it was to meet him that Ursula stole to the beechwood on that autumn day of crisp wind and ripe sunshine. Old Hugh had forbidden his house to the young man, making such a scene of fury about it that even Ursula's high spirit quailed. Old Hugh had really nothing against Kenneth himself, but years before either Kenneth or Ursula was born, Kenneth's father had beaten Hugh Townley in a hotly contested election. Political feeling ran high in those days, and old Hugh had never forgiven the MacNair his victory. The feud between the families dated from that tempest in the provincial teapot, and the surplus of votes on the wrong side was the reason why, 30 years after, Ursula had to meet her lover by stealth, if she met him at all. "Was the MacNair a Conservative or a Grit?" asked Felicity. "It doesn't make any difference what he was," said the Story Girl impatiently. "Even a Tory would be romantic 100 years ago. Well, Ursula couldn't see Kenneth very often, for Kenneth lived 15 miles away and was often absent from home in his vessel. On this particular day it was nearly 3 months since they had met. The Sunday before, young Sandy MacNair had been in Carlisle church. He had risen at dawn that morning, walked barefooted for 8 miles along the shore, carrying his shoes, hired a harbor fisherman to row him over the channel, and then walked 8 miles more to the church of Carlisle. Less, it is to be feared, from a zeal for holy things, that he might do an errand for his adored brother Kenneth. He carried a letter, which he contrived to pass into Ursula's hand in the crowd as the people came out. This letter asked Ursula to meet Kenneth in the beechwood the next afternoon, and so she stole away there, when suspicious father and watchful stepmother thought she was spinning in the granary loft. "It was very wrong of her to deceive her parents," said Felicity primly. The Story Girl couldn't deny this, so she evaded the ethical side of the question skillfully. "I am not telling you what Ursula Townley ought to have done," she said loftily. "I am only telling you what she did do. If you don't want to hear, you needn't listen, of course. There wouldn't be many stories to tell if nobody ever did anything she shouldn't do. Well, when Kenneth came, the meeting was just what might have been expected between two lovers who had taken their last kiss 3 months before. So it was a good half-hour before Ursula said, 'Oh, Kenneth, I cannot stay long. I shall be missed. You said in your letter that you had something important to talk of. What is it?' My news is this, Ursula. Next Saturday morning my vessel, the Fair Lady, with her captain on board, sails at dawn from Charlottetown harbor, bound for Buenos Aires. At this season this means a safe and sure return next May." "Kenneth!" cried Ursula. She turned pale and burst into tears. "How can you think of leaving me? Oh, you are cruel." "Why, no, sweetheart," laughed Kenneth. "The captain of the Fair Lady will take his bride with him. We'll spend our honeymoon on the high seas, Ursula, and the cold Canadian winter under southern palms." "You want me to run away with you, Kenneth?" exclaimed Ursula. "Indeed, dear girl, there's nothing else to do." "Oh, I cannot," she protested. "My father would—" "We'll not consult him until afterward. Come, Ursula, you know there's no other way. We've always known it must come to this. Your father will never forgive me for my father. You won't fail me now. Think of the long parting if you sent me away alone on such a voyage. Pluck up your courage, and we'll let Townleys and McNairs whistle their mouldy feuds down the wind while we sail southward in the Fair Lady. I have a plan." "Let me hear it," said Ursula, beginning to get back her breath. "There is to be a dance at the Springs Friday night. Are you invited, Ursula?" "Yes." "Good. I am not, but I shall be there, in the fir grove behind the house, with 2 horses. When the dancing is at its height, you'll steal out to meet me. Then 'tis but a 15-mile ride to Charlottetown, where a good minister, who is a friend of mine, will be ready to marry us. By the time the dancers have tired their heels, you and I will be on our vessel, able to snap our fingers at fate." "And what if I do not meet you in the fir grove?" said Ursula, a little impertinently. "If you do not, I'll sail for South America the next morning, and many a long year will pass ere Kenneth MacNair comes home again." Perhaps Kenneth didn't mean that, but Ursula thought he did, and it decided her. She agreed to run away with him. Yes, of course, that was wrong too, Felicity. She ought to have said, "No, I shall be married respectably from home, and have a wedding and a silk dress and bridesmaids and lots of presents." But she did not. She wasn't as prudent as Felicity King would have been. "She was a shameless hussy," said Felicity, venting on the long dead Ursula that anger she